So they say they found microplastics in placentas. This was reported by The Guardian about 4 years ago, but this article and the uh, associated scientific article continue to be referenced as evidence of microplastics in placenta. Of course, this is of concern because the placenta is the source of nutrition for unborn babies connected via an umbilical cord. So this is the public article, and this is a scientific article. Just to save time, I'm going to go to PowerPoint now. Okay, let's start with some statements from the Guardian article. A dozen plastic particles were found, and they point out that that was only about 4% of the placenta, so the total number could be much higher. And one of the authors stated it's like having a cyborg baby. It's a mixture of biological and inorganic entities. That's pretty suggestive language. If you work through the math, talking about 80 parts per trillion of the placenta. So, this statement's kind of like saying if you have $80, you're part trillionaire, which I've had $80 in my pocket several times. I never really felt like a trillionaire. So, that's a little extreme, but okay. And then one other statement is the mothers were shocked, and I bet they were. So, was there really any good, solid scientific evidence that there are any microplastics in the placenta at all? So let's go to the scientific article. This is from the Environment International article. 3 procedural blanks obtained following the same procedure without placenta samples were tested to monitor and correct potential contaminations. Now, we know, this was an early attempt at measuring these things, so they hadn't seen some of the other articles. But we know from things like the blood article and the breast milk article that this is really an absolute minimum of what you need to do in terms of blanks. And even then, if you're only finding like a couple particles on average from your tissue sample, this is probably not enough. But even more troubling is this is all they say about the blanks. I mean, they don't give anywhere. They don't talk about what they actually found in the blanks. I read the whole article. I read all their supplemental material many times. I never found any description of whether they found any particles in the blanks at all. It would be stunning if they didn't, because every other study like this has found some contamination in the control samples. So I I contacted the authors, as I always do. I asked for comment. They ignored me, as they usually do. So for me, I'm pretty much done with this article. There's almost always some contamination. Forget about limit of detection, limit of quantification, extensive analysis about, how quantifiable their data is. Without describing what they see in their blanks and comparing it with what they see in the samples containing tissues, there's not a complete scientific report. Okay, so could there be any other sources? Is there anything that they may not have considered as a potential source of contamination or a complicating factor during their study? Well, yeah, there's a lot. So one is during vaginal delivery, there's a potential for contact with stool. Stool is just another name for poop. Okay, so a lot of times the mother will have some stool come out during the delivery, and some of that could contact the placenta as the placenta comes out. And if there are microplastics in the stool, which has been demonstrated in other studies, that's where you would expect them. That could be a potential source of contamination. There are a lot of others, and you may be saying, Roger, no one's going to deal with all this stuff. And how did you even think of all of these things anyway? Well, the fact is, I didn't think of any of these, okay? It was these guys who did. So there was another paper that came along just a few months later, and this is the reference for that if you would like to read it, where they did think about all of these things, and they did control for all of these things. So in order to minimize concerns with stool contact, they only dealt with cesarean deliveries, C-section. And then you can read the rest of them. I mean, they really went to great lengths to either minimize or control for external contamination sources. So this was a much more careful study. So what did they find in this careful study? So this is what they say in this article. The two main conclusions are summarized here, and there's a lot of good data in there, and you should read it if you get a chance. But the first thing they do is they mention that this other article in reference 25, this is the Mother Shocker article that I just talked about. Those detections of microplastics should be interpreted with caution. In other words, we aren't sure. Like, we shouldn't really be sure that they actually found them. And then they go on to say that microplastics were detected in the placenta and meconium. The meconium is basically the baby's first poop, okay? So they say they did detect microplastics in both of these samples. However, if you look at all the controls where they also detected a lot of microplastics, this is really challenging, and our results should also be interpreted with caution. So one example of how you would interpret your results with caution would be to not go and tell mothers that they just gave birth to a cyborg baby. The main message of this article is we don't really know. So if you really want to summarize, uh, are there microplastics in placentas? Based on these two articles, the best answer we can have based on the scientific information is maybe. Thanks for watching. There's more to come.